Oh, the clicker.
And I'm right here for Slido as well. I'm right here for the Slido.
Oh, is this where you can see what's next as well?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. We're going to start. Look, we got the naughty kids at the back. there's always one. Always one. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michener. I'm an instructional designer with CEDL. My background is education, adult education and technology. And I work with my lovely colleague here, Emily. So just want to...
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I also work with Michelle on the instructional design team at CEDL. My background is in UI and UX design, so I love to look at the student side and kind of see how we can make that experience more fun. And we do lots of fun, cool, creative things on our team.
We do. So just if you wonder what instructional designers do, we work closely with subject matter experts to make sure that we create engaging learning that takes into consideration pedagogical practice, cognitive science, all these types of things to make sure that learners are actually having a valid learning experience. Because we all know you can throw things at people, but it's how you throw it at them and when is what we work on. So what we want to do today is we're going to be looking at how you can start looking at your slides from a very strategic point of view. We see a lot of slides decks come through to us, and we thought, what's some tips that we would like to give people so that you could just think through some ideas. Now, what we'd love to do, if Kate allows us, is do a part B, where we'll actually get into PowerPoint and do some actual fun, squishy stuff. But for now, we really want to focus just on some science behind how the brain works, and then talk about some how-tos. And of course, I can't remember. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an example. This is our mini little lesson. And here goes. What are the indications for cardiac stress testing? There are many diagnostic, prognostic, and therapeutic reasons to perform a graded exercise test. Diagnostic tests may be undertaken to identify abnormal physiological responses such as abnormal heart rate or rhythm, blood pressure changes with exertion. Prognostic tests may be used to identify potential adverse events. Example, heart attack, ischemia for patients with cardiovascular disease. Therapeutic tests help gauge the impact of a given intervention, for example, cardiac medications, and/or determine a prescription for patients who are beginning a vigorous exercise program. I've just taught you something. Whoa, wrong button. All right. So, I'm going to be talking about narration and slides because I know that at Michener we see a lot of narrated slides come through, which are wonderful because we're combining your auditory and your visual. However, we want to give you some tips on how to really optimize this form of delivery. So we're trying Slido as well. What we really are hoping is that people here in the audience feel free to just speak. But if you'd like to go into Slido, we are going to be asking questions, and your feedback is a really important part of our presentation. So please, if you're online especially, please could you scan the code because we're going to be engaging you as well in our discussions. So the first question I want to know is, how was your experience of that wonderful teaching you just experienced? I lost your attention partway through. Yeah. Okay.
It's hard to read the slide and listen to you at the same time.
It's hard to read and listen at the same time. Who here was reading faster than I was talking or vice versa? So you were doing them at two different speeds, right? Okay. I was tied by 0.2. Now this is one slide. You can imagine a slide deck of, 50 slides. So slide 0.2, this person was tired. Thanks for sharing that online. All right. So how helpful was me reading the slides? What value would you say did my narration give?
I liked your voice. That's
Thank
it.
you.
That's all I have.
The South African accent.
Yeah,
You just want to listen
easy
to
to
that.
listen to.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
It might be helpful if I forgot my glasses.
I'd be helpful if you forgot your. That's wonderful. So if you couldn't see it, my speaking would have helped.
The only thing I would say is apart from the volume, it's really for the auditory learners that sometimes that might be a good clue in for them.
Yeah, yeah. But let's think about them together, right? Together, that was not a winning combination. I think we can all agree. One word, if I would say, remember that slide, what do you remember? And it can be emotional, it can be an image, it can be word. Do you remember the 3 different types of tests? What comes straight to mind? If I get one word, what do you remember from that slide?
Just the topic,
What was the topic?
cardiac stress testing.
Cardiac stress testing. Anybody else get anything else from that slide that you can recall?
Yeah, there's prognostic, therapeutic, and diagnostic.
Are you in the field?
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't think that came from this slide. Yeah.
that did not come from the slide. All right, what I wanted to really show you is that unfortunately, despite our best intentions to read what's on the slide to make sure that everyone's getting the full experience, it's not effective. One of the reasons is that we read faster than we listen, than I could speak, right? So you've already lost people that are reading ahead. So what's happening is I'm just now adding noise over you trying to understand the slide. We got the picture. Okay. I missed signing into slide. Exercise stress test, the picture. All right, so I think it's fair to say that was a very unsuccessful mini lesson I gave you, and you're all going to fail. And I'm going to say, well, it's not my fault, it's your fault. There you go. All right, so what I wanted to do is I'm a bit of a learning science nerd. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of like, why is this happening? Because we've got good intentions. This should work. Why does it not work? One of the concepts is about dual channel principle. I like to think about it in terms of a highway. So you think of, say, Toronto. There's multiple highways coming into Toronto. And what happens is a educational psychologist found out that we have different roads for every sense. So what you hear is on one road, one highway. What you taste is another. What you see is another. So think in terms of all these highways bringing all these packages of information from different destinations to one central hub, potentially at the same time. So there's a lot going on. And, oh, I didn't realize those were going to do it. So really with the dual, because in education, mainly we focused on 2. I mean, I'd love it if we could do scratch and sniff education. It would be awesome. Or more cake, right? But really in the end, we're focusing on what we hear and what we see. Those are the 2 main senses we use. And what comes into your memory from your your eyes, is called iconic memory. And what comes in through your ears is called echoic memory. So there's 2 different types of memory already. So when you think about that slide, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of traffic on that highway, and it was just too much. Quick little nerdy explanation about how memory works. So there's kind of 3 big packets. The first is your sensory memory, the smelling, the hearing, the touching, the tasting, all right? That's a fleeting moment. Think you're in a restaurant and you smell garlic, right? It's there for a second and it's gone, right? What your working memory does is in this gap here, it's trying to decide what am I going to focus on. So you're in an Italian restaurant. You smell the garlic. You notice a man and wife are not speaking to each other, looking at their phones and not communicating. The waiter bumps over water into a lady's purse. Someone over there is paying their bill and their card's not working. You're in this restaurant. All these things are happening simultaneously. You're only going to be able to retain a few of those things. So your working memory is going, all right, guys, what's important here? And you'll notice one person put up a picture. One person remembered the picture from the slide. Was that an important part? No. All right. So what happens then is your brain goes in a split second, and by that I mean like a quarter of a second, your brain decides what it's going to hold on to. It decides, okay, I'm going to remember the smell of garlic. right? That's what I got from that moment. It then goes into short-term memory. Short-term memory now encodes it and tries to make sense of it. And there's 3 things that your students need for you to know that they actually remembered something. They need to sleep. So while you're sleeping, your synapses actually consolidate what was in your short-term memory into long-term memory. So they need to sleep. So perhaps testing them, to be honest, on the same day they learned something doesn't really prove they've got it lodged in their long term, right? Then they need to make meaning out of it. And they need to repeat it. You need to smell garlic multiple times to go, yeah, I think in Italians they use a lot of garlic. I'm smelling it every time I go into an Italian restaurant, right? So these 3 things are really important for it to go into long-term memory. And I mentioned working memory. Working memory is that phase between you sensing it and you actually putting it into your short-term memory. Working memory is where your brain says, guys, what are we focused on? What do we want to care about? What's happening? You got a split second to make that decision or it's gone. So what Emily and I are going to be looking at in our next few minutes is really this gap here about what attention your brain decides to, what attention, what is your brain going to pay attention to? Let me put it that way. So that's sort of the gap where we want to go into. Who here has heard of cognitive overload? Or can you tell me what do you understand by cognitive overload? And it's also, I'd love to know, because I think we've all heard that. Cognitive overload. We're like, yeah, we've heard that before. Anybody want to put on Slido or share with me, like, what do you think cognitive overload might involve? My brain can't hold anymore.
Too much information all at once.
Too much information at once. Think about that highway with all these little minivans making deliveries at the same time, right? And from all different directions. Yep.
Give me the pace of delivery, not just the amount.
Pace, okay. And do you mean pace like short term, like in one little session, but also across a program?
Absolutely.
Right? Because remember, we talked about you need repetition, you need to make meaning, and you need to sleep. Right? Those are 3 things you need to do.
We have overstimulation suggested from the Slido as well, feeling of overstimulation.
Overstimulated, right? You're being distracted by too many things going on. Thank you so much, everyone. So if we go back to the slide, right, which we've all agreed was not my most successful lesson I've ever given, I want to ask you, what are some things you think I could have done differently to make that an effective lesson? Thomas.
Less information on the board, more information coming from you.
Okay, so less visual and focus on the narration. All right.
All right, more relevant picture, perhaps?
More relevant picture. The picture was quite random, yes.
Maybe bolding the important points or putting into color what they
Lovely. Emphasis, because remember your brain's got seconds to make that, milliseconds to make that decision. So we need to help learners decide what they're going to focus on. Yeah.
Sometimes, I guess, putting some animation, so if you want to put an arrow or a circle around the stuff,
You could.
it's the most important, might be helpful. Especially sometimes if you absolutely need to put a lot of text. We all know that there are slides where you do have to put a lot of information.
Yep. Animation works, but keep in mind it's also distracting, so you got to like balance. But yes, 100%.
Oh, you could have them appear one by one. The lines could appear one by one.
Appear one by one. So think in terms of, go back to my analogy about the highway. Instead of having all the lorries coming in at once, they're coming in one after another, right? That's how your brain's receiving this information. Yeah.
Going back to your delivery, at least the speech should be additional context to the point. It shouldn't be you reading the actual context. So it's reinforcing or emphasizing what it is that's supposed to put on that particular point. Not necessarily the entire slide as a whole, but or certain points.
Yeah, and I'm just repeating what everyone says for the people online. So the point was, instead of just reading the slides as is, actually like elucidating the context of it, giving more information or focusing, emphasizing what's important. Now, I know some people say to me, well, I've got to put everything on the slide because students use that as their learning notes, all right? What I like to remind people is there's a note section. Don't forget, you can put all the stuff you want in your notes. You can go on, like write an essay. And what's great about the notes is they're also screen readers. So if you're concerned about students' visual acuity or whatever, there are screen readers. They read the notes just fine. So always think in terms of the slide is the visual, the notes are the reading, right? Although the slide obviously has reading too. And then the narration is the hearing. So we've got multiple highways coming in, but we want them to support one another. What question? Oh, so yeah, some of the things you can do. I've got sort of 3 tips here. You mentioned have them come in one at a time. So there you go. Balance how much you give at one time. That reading with you reading, me speaking, that doesn't work. So balance that. Don't make redundancies, right? Keep it simple. Let the person's brain focus right on what they need to know. And then you guys all came up with these answers already, so I think actually Emily and I can just go, because you mentioned emphasis. Use symbols, use graphs. If you can do a graph or a symbol that shows something, use that, all right? Because that frees up some of that cognitive load that's happening. So based on this, again, I wanted to just give you, before I pass over to Emily, a quick idea of how I would think through a slide like this as a designer. So what I've done is, first of all, I have not changed a word on the slide at all, okay? But what I took in mind is, it's a very fancy schmancy word that I want everyone to remember. It's called chunking. And the first time I heard it, as an educator and sort of interested in the way the brain works, I thought, they've just come up with that and they're going to come up with a better word. 15 years later, it's still called chunking. So we're not going to get a better word for it. I always wish a nice Latin word or something. Huh?
Make it sound Latin.
Yeah, yes. Chunking. But anyway, that's the official term. Chunking is really about thinking of all your vehicles on the highway. Instead of having all them coming in with big loads, then you've now got nice little Amazon packages. So here's a package. It's a digestible chunk. You can look at it. You can go through it on your own pace, and then you can move on. So all I've done here is I've visually chunked the 3 phases, tests. That's all I did. Did not change a word. Now, personally, if I was going to present this slide, this is what I'd probably do. Okay? To Thomas's point, I would have it very simple, and I would not narrate the slide. And a few of you have mentioned that. So I would leave this, because you know what? Think in terms of someone's brain, if you're lucky, is going to come out with 3 points from each slide. If you're lucky. So I've decided what's important. I just want them to know these 3 tests. I'm now going to speak to it, and I have my notes for learners to refer back to if they want the full spiel. And this is going to, based on our highway and all that congestion, this is giving the learner a much better experience. It's going to be more impactful. They're going to remember it, and they're going to have a chance to put it into the long-term memory. Because when we bombard people with too many little parcels, it can actually shut down. Cognitive overload, it's like the depot has closed. Nothing is getting in. And once you get that with your students, you can go on for another hour, and unfortunately, nothing is going to change. So I'm going to pass it over to Emily. Oh, there you go.
Perfect. Okay, so before we move over to a different example, or before we hit accessibility, actually, I should say rather, this next page is just an example of how we can make our points more concise and staying the same thing. So when we're thinking about how we want to narrate a slide, of course, there's a lot that you can put on there in terms of words, but these steps are exactly these same 5 steps. So between those 2, which one do you think the students are going to remember when they're trying to take a patient's blood pressure, right? So just flipping back and forth there. But now we'll move forward to example C, and I will do something similar to Michelle, in which we'll talk about a slide, and then I'll talk about kind of my strategy around what I would do to that slide and some tips and tricks as well. So we've got treadmill protocols here, and I'm not going to give you too long to look at it because I want to ask what the first thing that caught your attention was. If you can remember anything about that slide, Thomas.
I love the scrunched up little picture at the top right hand.
Scrunched up little picture in the top right corner. Perfect. Any? Oh, sorry, it's just flicking over there. The yellow. Did we see what the yellow said by chance? Okay, perfect. Didn't want you to. The person with a mask, I'm impressed that we could see it was, in fact, a mask. So this is exactly the point that Michelle and I are really trying to hammer home here. So thank you for that. In that, those are the things that I saw as well. You know, you think the Bruce protocol is really important when it comes to treadmills. So I'm going to highlight it and make it yellow. But instead, I've actually distracted from the rest of what I wanted to talk about. And you'll notice that I've been talking this whole time, but I have said nothing about treadmills. So what is the point of this slide? And as we begin to learn more and start to understand more about how we process information, you'll notice that you're starting to read the slide and you're not listening to me anymore either. So let's talk about what we would do with this slide. So the very first thing that jumped to me is to do the title, the template, and the topic, whichever order you want to say those in, the 3 T's. So that last slide was titled Treadmill Protocols. This next slide is Identifying Room for Improvement, because that is what we're going to do. So the students know straight from seeing the slide that this is what the topic is. I also wanted to just jump forward for a sec, because using the template, like where it says click to add title, do we all know how to use the template out there? Do we all use click to add title? Okay, please don't create your own text box to make your own title. It is much more accessible and easier for us on the design end if you use the template and the boxes as they are. Not sure if anyone in this room has worked with us on our Articulate line of products before, but this will actually auto-populate the menu, which saves me so much time. So if you could please use the template, that would be great. Okay, so next we'll pop over to choice of visuals. So thank you to everyone that noticed the scrunched up images, but we really want to be intentional about what sort of visual we're putting onto the slides. So the treadmill, for example, we all know more or less what a treadmill does, and if I didn't, this picture isn't helping me get there. So when we're choosing pictures, we want to make sure that they are always adding value. If you're not sure why it's there, then just remove it. Get really specific on why that picture should be there. Of course, they should be appropriately referenced. We want to make sure they're not blurry, any of those things. I might send you an email and ask for a new version. Now we'll just touch on to accessibility really quickly, because that could be part C, I think, of our series. We're on D now.
Created a saga of
Yeah, seriously. So we'll just hit the accessibility highlights. So we always want our content to be accessible to as many learners as possible, whether they are visually impaired, auditorily impaired, either way. So this is where I actually really want to talk about color choice and emphasis, as we were talking about before. So these are the brand colors of our new look, I guess we'll go ahead and say. And I really wanted to emphasize that the medium that you are delivering your slides on will make an impact in how students are seeing those colors. So these are actually all completely different colors that it looks like on my screen versus what they look like projected right now. And the colors I really wanted to draw your attention to is that green. See, it's probably about the 6th one down, not even sure if you can tell that it's green. But that one is a very tricky color to use accessibly. A lot of the time you think green, that means correct, that means I'm adding emphasis. It's very, very hard for visually impaired people to see the color green. Green is also a color that we all see differently in terms of the cones in our eyes and how much light we have exposed to them over the course of our lives. So we can all feel very differently towards tones of colors of green. I did want to show you here where you can access the themed brand colors in PowerPoint if you are using the template. It's just those top ones there. The very top, right under where I have highlighted theme colors, those are the highest contrast version of the colors, and we want to make sure we're choosing high contrast whenever possible. And this is part of the reason why. So I wanted to demonstrate why highlighting can sometimes do the opposite effect, as we had learned with Bruce Protocol. It can get hard to read to the point where your eyes aren't even able to focus on the color for long enough to read it. And I also wanted to show you what italices looked like, because they shift the line in which our eyes are reading and actually make it more challenging to read. We all also have our own sort of approach to how we see the value of italices. Some people see them as supplemental information, some people see them as quotes, some people see them as very important, and so keeping them flat and not italicized is your safest bet. And finally, one more last lesson in contrast. We have the dark blue background here, which we can use sparingly, right? We want to be integrating those colors and integrating those differences to stimulate those visual differences in our slides to help with that recall. So when I think back to Michelle's slides that have the 3 red boxes on them, it's much easier for me to think, oh, I'm remembering those 3 steps, as opposed to whatever else has gone on in that deck. Any questions here about accessibility so far? Okay, great. Okay, so this is just a reminder of what the slide looked like before we started to get strategic and sciencey about it. And this is the exact same content, the exact same slide with only those 3 things addressed. So we've got the title, the topic, and the template used. So we're now talking specifically about the standard Bruce protocol. Our emphasis chosen was bold, so we didn't include any weird greens or bright yellows. And I chose a visual that helped to visualize the data and make it a little bit more friendly. So I'm not saying that this is perfect. There's still a lot that I would do with this slide, but those are kind of the 3 basic things that I would look at before letting something continue to go through production. And then that brings us to our next one. So back to the chunking. We love chunking. A way that I like to chunk it is doing the what, why, now what, or so what. And once you're thinking about your slides, those 3 things should really be answered on every single topic. And it's a very easy way to sort of chunk it out. Now, how I would continue to look at this slide is I would think, okay, do I want my students to know more about the stages? Do I care about the speed? Do I care about the percentage grade that they are using? Or do I care more about the what, why, the now what? And that's where I would want to work with you as a faculty member to better understand, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at the Bruce protocol as a whole? Are we looking at the stages of the Bruce protocol? And that's where we'll start to define your learning objectives even deeper. And that brings us almost down here to the end of the 3 main design considerations that Michelle and I will typically look at. We want to make sure that we're balancing these elements, and they're great on their own. They're best when all 3 of them are together, and they only get stronger when they're in pairs. So when you're starting to think about creating your slides, think about what you want to build on top of them. Are they also going to include narration? Are we looking at asynchronous delivery? Do we want more interactivity? Stuff like that. We want to also make sure that we're doing, making accessible choices in terms of color, font, all of those fun things. Intentional visuals, concise narration. So these are all things that we can help you with at CEDL, whether it's through using tools that we have, like that last one I made there was from Canva. It took me about 10 minutes, So we have access to tools like that can really help you bring your visuals to life. Things like Storyline, we can do things in Rise, we can do things in other articulate products that really help to bring those slides one level up. All right. Do we have any questions on the design front? Actually, I'm not sure if we have a Slido yet. Nope. We missed a Slido at the end. Anyways, wasn't part of the Venn diagram, so. Okay, so do we have any questions? Anything about PowerPoint tips? If we want to know more about accessibility?
Ask a general question in
Absolutely.
relation to content to slide versus number of slides. And for those of us who teach very content-heavy courses, we're talking about one lecture being 100 slides plus. There is something to say about trying to space out your information for proper exposure, as you were talking about. But then conversely, also versus the number of slides total that students have to review or go through. So, we do our best to condense, as you talked about, really being concise where possible, even terminology, condensation, trying to keep things as minimal as possible. But I guess what is out there in terms of the knowledge base, in terms of frequency of exposure, because we know how much it takes and time it takes for students to retain, and they actually, an argument, I think that's a skill that's becoming harder in terms of their study processing of actually ingraining things into memory as you're talking about. And so, in terms of frequency, number of slides versus, content per slide, how we find the right balance.
Passing it to me.
You want to go first or second? Was actually what I was looking.
First, they hear me first. So the question was, is the question how many slides is too many slides, maybe?
I guess, or how to space out content
How to
appropriately
space
to
out
better effectively, reach the
Deliver
student.
slides.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been in debates about this. Emily might not actually agree with me, so this will be an interesting moment. I believe that each slide should be effective in and of itself. You should not cram it full of stuff just because you got more stuff. If you got more stuff, make more slides. That's just me. So you got 200 slides, is that ideal? No, that's exhausting. But if you have to have all that content to meet your outcomes, remember, try and cull. Don't, and I remember someone gave me advice. They said, yeah, I'm looking at you. I have a feeling you're not a color. You look like you have more stuff.
Not that I don't want to be.
I remember someone giving me advice. She said, never add something unless you take something out. And that's hard because we want our students to know everything that we know. We want them to be brilliant. But we know from the science of learning, you're actually making it worse. They're going to know less because you've done that, not more. So I really urge you to strategically think about your slides and go, is this meeting the goal I'm aiming at? You've got my outcomes, right? Is this meeting my outcome? I always joke about the history of, I'm a history minor, love history, majored in art history. I just wallowed in history in my undergrad. So I'm a history nerd. But you do not have to start every lesson with the history of, because it may not be meeting your objectives. I remember in my master's, I had a prof who wanted to talk about, because my master's was in adult education technology. So he's like, oh, we're going to talk about technology. And then he started the history of, and he started at the abacus. And I giggled because I thought, oh, he's going to fast forward. Oh, no. He went through every technology since the abacus. And I can promise you now that information has never made me a better educator. It's just given me a giggle. That was it. I just remember giggling, but I'm not better at anything because I know the history of the abacus. So really be mindful and thoughtful. But again, like I said, I would rather see more slides that are impactful than less slides, but they're just a squish of things. So I don't know.
In speaking to myself, I teach anatomy and physiology, so there's a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
pictorial aspects.
Okay.
And I try and minimize the content, but it's very hard. I teach the full body in 3 months, and at a high level
Yeah.
of detail. So I do try and balance with, videos, with, with images. I've even started incorporating CT and MRI scans and showing
that's wonderful.
visually as well. It's challenging to meet, content delivery, trying to provide the different modalities. However, I also don't know, and I think I'm trying to use all the tools mentioned as best as I can at present. I'm sure that there's lots I can do still. But I guess I worry because of the volume alone, how best to effectively meet the need, right?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is there's fatigue and monotony, right? So if you have, so I love that you said you brought up different scans and videos and including all of those things, but chunking is not just relevant to slides, right? So even if I had 400 slides that I needed students to get through, there is probably an approach that you would have taken as a subject matter expert in creating those slides. So instead of saying to students, hey, everybody, please review these 400 slides by next week, you could say, I have these 5 decks on your own time. As you're able to digest them, you might be able to chunk them out that way and give students a little bit more of an opportunity to decide, I am not overstimulated with content right now. I am now ready to X, Y, Z. If you find that that's an issue that you're having.
Well, and trying to reinforce it other ways. So we have an on-lab
Well, remember we talked about repetition and making of meaning,
Yeah.
right? You can have brilliant slides. You can have absolutely perfect slides. But if you're not getting into that long-term memory through sleep, repetition, and making of meaning, those slides didn't matter. So just keep that in mind. Does anybody have any advice about slides? Because I know slide fatigue and just bullets. I have a thing about bullets. They're not my friends. I'm not going to stop because we'll be here all day. But anybody else got some advice that you've ever heard from someone about just, you got a lot of content. Yeah.
I just kind of went through one of my courses and made the slides my own because I'll be teaching it next semester. And one of the things I noticed was there was a lot of repetition from the textbook readings. So the textbook reading was an assigned reading, and it would say chapter 4, and then the slides were literally like verbatim, like copy-pasted chapter 4 paragraphs, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like if you're asking the students to read something, chapter 4, you're expecting them to read it before they come to class, so your slides should then just be maybe talking about the concepts or showing a picture, like you said, or like showing a video that relates to chapter 4, but don't then repeat it, because then you're just teaching the students they don't need to do the readings, because you're going to repeat the readings in class. So
That's a great tip.
I think that is an important
That's a great
thing to consider, and that will maybe help reduce your number of slides.
And make them more meaningful, because now you're going into the deeper explanation of concepts rather than just giving them that. I noticed that if you ever use publisher slides, that's pretty much what you do. You're repeating the textbook again. Yeah.
I know you just mentioned about faculty sharing their notes with the students. I personally will never do that. What is your thought on the accountability of students taking their own notes? Because, we've moved, back in the day when I was here, we took notes all the time during lecture, right? And so the muscle memory of writing something down is very important. So I'm trying to figure out what your thought is on the balance between, like, how bare do I make my slides? Yes, they may have a recording, but how much do we expect them to jot down? Because really, the pendulum has shifted from here to here, where they don't even have a pen sometimes when they come to class, because they don't really use them much anymore, right? So anyways, just the accountability of how much do we expect?
Yeah, so I'll take this one if you don't. Sorry, Jen?
I know that in CE, we are required to give them the notes. So if you're talking on a slide, we have
They have the
must
transcription.
script.
I have
Must
my
give it to them.
transcription on, but I don't show my notes at the bottom of the slide.
Oh, no, that's different.
No, I have my transcription going and they can see.
Yeah, so
what-
usually the notes at the bottom of the slide is either for you.
For me,
Yeah, that's your teacher.
yes.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be required
Yeah.
to.
No, and I
Provide
don't
that in
intend
a-
to.
Maybe we misconstrued
Maybe I
your earlier
misunderstood
comment
you.
about comments, and then, like, we know that there's a narration version, but was there something else? Were you saying the notes should also be available to students?
Sorry, I suppose notes means multiple things. I meant in the notes, it's literally underneath the slide, it says notes, it's that area.
But were you referring that
Well,
to
what
go
are
to
those
students or
notes
not?
comprised?
Depends how you use it,
I
yeah.
come from a background where everything has to be accessible, and with accessibility, which is actually the law, you need to provide things in accessible formats. So if you're narrating, which is auditory, you're meant to provide it as best to your ability in a written form.
But you're not required to give your teacher.
You
notes.
don't
Those
need to
are
give
their
your
own
teacher
things.
notes,
Correct.
your own note.
I just
But
want to
if
make
you're,
sure, because I
Yeah, yeah,
understood
yeah.
No, you don't
wanted
need to give
me
your
to give
teacher
them-
notes.
no, no, no.
I think the convention is most of us use that as a place for our own notes. So this is the problem in design.
So I do think though that if your slides are getting very wordy, like if they're wordy, you don't need another slide, but you still haven't made your point, then there would probably be some sort of supplementary explanation material, written word that could live in the notes. It doesn't mean that you need to give your teacher's notes to your students though.
Right.
It's just that it
I
could
would
be
just
there
put
if you
the
wanted to
thing,
supplement.
And then the transcription is on, and they can refer to the transcription
Yeah.
from an accessibility
I think
standpoint.
having the transcription on
Is key.
is exactly what I was saying, is you can put it in your notes, what you narrate, yes.
Okay.
You're providing
I
that.
will say for the transcription, I think it's newer in terms of the additive, and I don't know how many people are using it universally, Like I know I put it on for my students, and you know, it seems to be translating to video recordings and other things that we do,
Yeah.
but I don't think through the school it is necessarily a current universal.
No, I don't think it's.
option.
No, I mean, listen, I think ideally it would be a tool to use. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a very strong auditory learner. I cannot remember words to songs. I'm a reader. I mean, and pictures. I remember colors and pictures. I don't remember. So for me, if everything came at me very auditory heavy, I personally it would be a struggle for me just because that's my personal go-to. My son has been tested. He's like 98% auditory learner. So he can quote songs, he can quote movies, he was like night and day, the two of us. So just to keep in mind that if you're dealing with students that input, so we talk about those channels are working different for different students on those senses. So yeah. Thomas.
Oh, sorry, if this conversation's not wrapped up, I have a separate question, because the content that we deliver is quite different, where it's teaching students how to use services, how to, use something simple like Zotero, right? Where basically what I've had to come down to is like screenshots combined with like arrows, combined with blowing up certain things, being like, use this in this way. And I've received conflicting feedback. Some of it's like, don't use screenshots, just use text. Others is like, without the screenshots, I don't understand what you're saying. So I'm in an unhappy medium where I've just kind of done what works with seemingly for most people, but as experts, what would you do in that scenario?
I mean, again, I feel like this could be a difference of opinion, but okay, actually I'm going to answer both. I prefer a screenshot if the screenshot is from the same computer as me. So I'm a Mac user. If the screenshot actually looks like my screen, super useful. That's what I would choose. If the screen does not look like my screen, then I'm lost. Then I'm going to go step by step with the words. But I think that that's true in any imagery, right? It's the same in like knowing how I learn, and in there are ways that like students kind of know how they learn as well. So my option is to always say have both.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Because then you're kind of satisfying the people who like the image, but you're satisfying the people who need the words.
I've got a quick story about that. I did a certificate in adult education in CE, anyway. Not the CE, but I love CE. Anyway, and we were learning rubrics, and we had to mark something, and it was top down. It was this table. And I was looking at it, and I must have had this look on my face because my instructor came up to me, this fabulous woman, and she said, Michelle, I can see this quiz on your face, like what's going on? And I said, I know this sounds weird, but I think my brain works left to right, not top to down. She goes, I have the rubric like that. She gave me the rubric that's going the other way. I'll never forget that because it blew my mind that this woman has, I mean, she was just magnificent, but like, those little things, believe it or not, and I looked at her and went, okay, this is how my brain works. Now, are we all going to have our, no, that's pretty phenomenal if you ask me. But we've got to keep in mind that, some of our learners are reading top down and some of the others are doing left to right, and how are we going to work with that? So I'm with Emily, make both.
So basically the key message is to do it all, but with less slides. No.
But more slides if you need more slides.
And in less time with less work.
I just wanted to go back to the earlier comment about the textbook being on the slide.
Yes.
There was commentary about the expectation of students to do pre-readings. Okay, and we've talked about how the dynamic of studying has changed for students. One of the things that I try and emphasize for students when they're especially challenged or they're having trouble navigating, especially because we have long lectures, 3 hours long, and with breaks, of course, et cetera, but
It's
still
hard.
a lot of volume.
It's hard.
So I try and emphasize for students to pre-read the lecture slides, not in terms of content, but at least to go through to get familiarity with the content in advance, because that auditory portion that you were talking about, it would allow them to focus maybe a little less on the text and more so on what's being said and the explanations. Now, I don't know how much that is being done. I don't know what the literature says in relation to that, but the idea is the more amount of passes with information, the greater the retention and awareness and meaningfulness potentially on top of it. So, how do we emphasize, and I guess this goes back to, I do a lot of pre-learning meetings and I do learning plans sometimes with students, and I send a pre-meeting survey, and I get them to fill out what their learning style is, how do they study, how they do all these things, and it's very eye-opening to the nature of how studying has changed for students. A lot of people don't put in necessarily the time or energy, and I've added now, I've added questions in relation to, are you using AI tools? How are you using them? In what ways? Just to get clarity and understanding. Just to see, because we know the more time spent with the content, the more iterations, the more passes, the more likely for retention. So I guess my question boils down to really is, what is that expectation that learners are really looking at material in advance, and how do we bridge that when we know that's likely potentially not the case, right? As a way of continuing to build into that memory.
I'm going to leave that to Emily to solve that problem. Come on, Emily, fix that.
I actually solved that, yes. I solved that one yesterday, guys. No.
But just a commentary.
Yeah.
The nature of how they're preparing
Yes.
for material is changing entirely, right? So how do we meet that need, right? So.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really good question. And I think, like, if I put myself back in my student shoes, so I studied human nutrition and I was a dietitian for a while. And when I put my anatomy hat on and I think about the volume of content and the length of those lectures. And at the end of the day, I was the one that wanted to learn it. And so I think it's really reminding students that it is ultimately their choice, right? Like they're the ones that are here to learn. It's their success. It's their opportunity as well. And I think that as long as they see you in a partner in that, you might have a little. I don't know for sure. I haven't met your students, but that's kind of how I lean to it.
It's not a
Yeah.
comment to anything specific, but it's just more of a trend that is definitely changing the way we have to obviously approach design in terms of our education, for sure.
Absolutely.
But I worry that it doesn't, you're right, it's having those engaging conversations about how to set yourself up for success, which I think we do.
Yeah, I think so
in
too.
a lot of ways, but it's how do you emphasize it enough where they're coming prepared, you know what I mean?
For sure. I'd love to hear what Jen has to say, yeah.
Janet made such a great point. The other, like we were talking about, is the fact that if you have a reading, or you're expecting them to have a reading, you're not reteaching it in class. You're going, what's up, sweetie?
Can't hear you.
You're going deeper. So I can tell you that when I was an undergrad, it was always the application. So if you didn't show up doing what you had to do, you were totally lost. It took one time to figure that piece out, that we actually weren't going to reteach you what you had to already read. We were going to go through it maybe lightly, but it wasn't going to be a deeper dive. We were now going to move into application. And I think that's what you were saying before, is that there is a responsibility. So either you learn that here, or where else are you going to learn it? Because you don't want to learn it on the job, because that would not be ideal. But you won't make it to the job unless you learn it here. So I think having that, but they're adult learners too. Like, these aren't high schoolers, they're adult learners. So at some point they have to take responsibility for themselves.
And it's our job to set the expectation. I'm expecting you to read that.
Yeah.
But if I am expecting you to read that and then I'm reteaching it again, and then the next lecture I'm taking half an hour out of the lecture to review what I taught you and you had to read the week before, which is good for reinforcement in some ways, but you're also babying them maybe a little too much. And yeah.
I think that's, I don't know if you, I remember the angst of faculty saying we're babying them, and I get it, because I taught too, and I felt like I was putting in way more work than they were, and it's like, I've already got my degree, like, I don't need to prove that I know this, you need to prove that you know this. So I feel the angst, and I do think setting very strong expectations, unfortunately letting people fail, like
Just so
that's
hard.
a hard one, because we want them all to succeed. There are little babies, little buds, but it's I think there's a very common thing that's going on around all our programs. Yeah.
So this is my first time leading a heavy microbiology class where I'm teaching theory. And I think something that I've noticed, I guess, the students really excited about the material is like sparking their curiosity. So I talk a lot, I show a lot of like cool YouTube videos and be like, guys, did you know if you could jump into like a swimming pool, then the water goes up your nose, you can get this brain-eating amoeba, and I'll do things like that. And then they're like, oh, and then they're all excited about the slides, which would kind of be boring if I didn't use those examples. So I feel like number one, curiosity, and number two, motivation, which is like, okay, I need to motivate you, but in order to motivate you, it's like, why is this applicable to you? And I think that the application piece is really important too. So just that constant reminder of like, this is gonna benefit you to know that, and yeah, I think that's helped me a lot. But yeah, the curiosity thing.
It's a great tip.
We talked a lot about that in my Master's of Education that I'm doing right now, but it's a huge topic in school that we talked about. Yeah.
No, that's a great suggestion.
I think we're at, oh, sorry.
Probably time for one more.
Bring us home, Thomas.
Oh, no.
Close us out.
Good
Well,
one.
I think I have sort of like a tag-on question. I think what's being brought up here a lot is like, what's the role of supplementary material? Because I can teach you X, Y, Z thing, but I can't go into the same excruciating detail I can go in if I give you a guide that I've designed that lives elsewhere. But I can tell you what exists, right? And so the thing which you were saying is like put everything into the slides, right? Agree, it's a great idea.
No,
as
not
much as
everything
possible.
into slides. I think the idea was to have it in multiple ways.
Yeah, so like in your
Doesn't have to
presentation,
be in
your slides,
slides.
the delivery, you try to have as much content as possible for the students to get what you're trying to teach. Is that fair?
What do you mean as much as possible? Because we're kind of trying to talk about paring it back.
Yeah, so
Making
remember
it
what I said
simpler.
earlier?
I'm like, should we redo our presentation, Thomas?
That's okay. So I'll give you a concrete example. So I have to teach students how to use a citation manager. It's one of the things that we are sort of geared towards. It's a piece of software. I tend to describe it in terms of screenshots,
Yes.
right?
Right.
Along with sort of guided portions of like, this lives here, this is how you do this. But I have a guide that's like several pages long about how to do all these things separately. What's the balance between these two? Because I can get you into a rough and ready state using this presentation, but I can't teach you the same amount as if you would, like a textbook. A textbook will teach you an infinite amount of knowledge. But for me, it's the balance between I need to get you to X, Y, Z state of readiness. If you want, there's this other material here that I'm going to point you to, right? So you said, for instance, we have instructions on Mac and Windows installation. I tend to go with Windows. It's what the majority of people use. But it's out there. I have a detailed set of instructions on how to download and use this using Mac, right? Where does this fall? Like, how do I balance these two goals?
I mean, I would say to get the student to executing the bare minimum of the task, you know, like you get to a point of, yep, I'm competent in being able to do this alone. And then as the learner, if I'm somebody that wants to learn more, am I going to ask you to help me to figure out how to do that? Like, what is,
Probably.
so then that would be my chance to say, have you read this guide? Because like you can't make people read things unless they see the value or the point in it for themselves, right? But you can save your own time by sending somebody to a resource you've already made.
And
That would be what I'd
keep in
do.
mind that when we talked about those little packets, you know, those little lorry van deliveries happening, only so much of what you tell that student in, like, how long is that presentation? 15 minutes?
Anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour.
Okay. Only some of those packages got through. Right?
They're going to have to practice that.
Yeah, just a few packages got through, the rest got held up at customs or somewhere, and so you're gonna have to fight to get them, but like, you have to be honest that one time through, regardless of the format, is probably not gonna, so we have to think of repetition, we have to think of multiple means. And that is unfortunate because you don't wanna find yourself repeating the same thing, but I bet you do, don't you? You repeat the same thing over
I think I
and
hit
over.
same students like 3 times.
Right, because they need the repetition, right? So you could think in terms of, well, could I make this into a video? Can I make it into a document? And can I be on site? Like, someone told me you have to teach it 3 different ways. Everything, like to get that delivery to happen, 3 different ways, 3 different times. So it's exhausting, isn't it? Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, especially people in the room, people online. And awesome.
I've suggested some reading if you're nerdy, but we've also got, we talked about multiple means. We've also made a handout, because not everything has to be in PowerPoint, right? So there is a brochure that will be emailed out to you just to sort of outline some of the main tips. But thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining.
And don't forget to enter your chance. Oh, we tried to do it too many times. Don't forget the prize that is I've heard, pretty decent prizes, Kate says herself.
Now, there's some tech prizes, gift cards, we've got some options.
And listen, if you have questions about design, like there's a whole instructional design team. We would love to help you. It makes us happy.
Do you have a deck that's driving you crazy? We'd love to help.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.